If yesterday we only received verbal confirmations that the Ukrainians have carried out a series of successful offensive actions and established control over multiple settlements at once, today, Ukrainian fighters have finally begun to publish images confirming these advances. First of all, the RE volunteer detachment hoisted the Ukrainian flag over Neskikny. This is the village that the Ukrainians managed to secure by establishing control over the tactical heights around the settlement and basically raising the Russians out of the village, unleashing a devastating fire that did not allow the Russians to move even within the village itself. At the same time, fighters of the 68th Jager Brigade raised the Ukrainian flag over Blahodatny. This is the village that the Ukrainians managed to capture without firing a single shot. The Ukrainians understood that these Russian positions were inconsequential and, by attacking Hain, created a very high risk of encirclement for the Russian troops and forced them to retreat. And the Russians made a very prudent decision to withdraw because today, Russian sources began reporting on new advances by the ruthless Ukrainian assault units. If yesterday the fighting took place on the forest line in front of the settlement, this morning, the Ukrainians broke through the last line of defense protecting the settlement and entered the northern part. Therefore, if the Russians at Blahodatny had not withdrawn, they would have been taken in a pocket and destroyed within hours. The most recent reports from fighters currently storming the Russian defense indicate that the Ukrainians made another push along the hills, causing an immediate collapse of the upcoming Russian fortifications on the line. If we look at the topographic map, we can see two things. First of all, the Ukrainians have completed the operation of capturing the first group of heights. And secondly, the Russians in Makarivka found themselves in exactly the same situation as the settlements above. They are under the Ukrainian hills and suffering devastating fire. Therefore, the Russian command decided once again to carry out a tactical regrouping towards more reliable positions. A few hours ago, the Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister reported that Makarivka had been successfully liberated by Ukrainian forces. But the good news does not end here. The most recent reports indicate that the Ukrainians finally pressed the Russians from Lavatny and entered a new ridge of tactical heights advancing towards Pryutny. As can be seen, now the Russian forces in Novodenilivka and Rivnopil are at risk of being encircled and are very likely to abandon their positions. And this is a very painful blow to the Russian defense because, as you will recall, here the Russians had the most robust fortifications that the Ukrainians failed to penetrate in the first series of attacks. In a desperate attempt to slow Ukrainian advances, Russian forces blew up a dam south of Staromalinivka. By emptying the reservoir, water levels in the lowlands will rise and prevent Ukrainians from rapidly shifting their forces between the eastern and western banks of the river. Such an action is also a very obvious sign that the Russians abandoned Hain because this is the only settlement on the eastern bank in the area, and with the flooding, they simply would not be able to get additional reinforcements or withdraw. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are already testing new lines of attack in order to further expand the bridgehead and significantly increase the scale of their operation. Today, Russian sources have reported that the Ukrainians have carried out a series of force reconnaissance operations near Novodonetsky and Novomyorsky. This is another indicator that the Ukrainians have taken Hain because such attacks would help the Ukrainians match the front line precisely at the height of the settlement. At the moment, offensive actions continue, and if everything goes according to plan, we can expect the collapse of the Russian tactical group Novodorivka-Rivnopil-Staromyorsky.